Hi, Blaze.
Hello. Oh my God, I feel like Britney Spears. It's like a.
Look just like her. So, Boiler Room started in a warehouse back in 2010.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about how you came up with the idea and how it came to fruition.
So in 2010, I was working in music. Everyone I knew was passionate about music, whether they were working it or not. And I'd seen the kind of cycle that tends to happen in cities like London, where a lot of stuff that sort of starts at the underground gets a lot of excitement in press and starts to pick up and then inevitably kind of goes global and hits a bigger audience. And at that point, me and a lot of people around me were right in the center of that and feeling excited about the music that was coming out of London. People were calling it post-dubstep, but it was like a sort of resurgence in good underground electronic sounds. And it had a really kind of exciting group of people around it, you know, who are record diggers, who didn't link themselves just to one genre. They'd play Fela Kuti next to a techno record. And it had this overall feeling of something, like any good music scene or any kind of good, kind of appealing or intriguing group of people, that had this feeling of like, I want to be part of that, it's exciting, something here is going to happen no matter how big it goes. And I think the main instinct behind Boiler Room in the beginning was, let's try and capture that thing that I was seeing right in front of me. Let's try and capture that somehow and translate it to people who are not privy to this friend circle or in East London. And naturally that meant video, because audio-only mixes, online radio is an amazing part of music sort of promotion. But there's something very powerful about seeing music, seeing the way that people take in music, and as subtle as it is, the way that people react to a song, what people wear, the way they hang out with each other, how tactile they are with each other, whatever it might be. And we didn't think of it nearly as academically as then, but it was just like, this thing's exciting, it feels exciting, let's try and kind of create a window so other people can experience it. And so we started Boiler Room as this like almost a sort of art project, or like it was a hobby. I had access to a massive old warehouse in Hackney Wick, or in Hackney Downs. And I was attempting as a sort of other business to try and earn some money. I was trying to refurbish the whole thing. And so I had access to the old boiler room within the building that was like a 1930s actual heating furnace. And it was the only room we weren't going to do anything with. It was full of asbestos and kind of crumbling and redundant. So we decided to start using that room as a sort of TV studio in which we would invite people into that room so they could have complete creative control. And we would televise the whole thing using a webcam, live streaming a 4-hour hangout, friends music session to anyone who cared online. And that was really all it was. It was like, let's use a webcam in this empty space to promote what's going on, what we're excited about as it is. And actually, rather than talk about it, I'm going to show you, I didn't prepare anything, but I've got a clip that for anyone who doesn't know Boiler Room, or anyone who's seen Boiler Room but has never seen the kind of first 6 months of it. This is how it looked for a year before we had any intentions of it being a business or anything. The first time we switched our webcams on, this is what people saw. So if you play video 1 for as long as, until people get bored, it will show you.
Para los
sort of, you know, about, like, now we look at things when we talk about the evolution of Boiler and we talk about how at that time there was no music television that had power. We'd kind of grown up with an inkling of like MTV in its heyday, of watching music as a way of getting into it, of a way of music being on big screens, but it was all around like a 4-minute pop video, 4 minutes of visuals against a pop song. And at the time, the thing we felt excited about was our version of club culture in the UK. And of course, club culture was existing and thriving all around the world. Techno in Berlin, EDM in Middle America, whatever, like different versions of it all around the world. But DJs and club culture had completely taken over as a sort of internet-born phenomenon. what we were doing was saying club culture is really interesting and exciting. Let's try and televise that. And I now think of it as like the music video for the DJ. At the time we started, television was really struggling to kind of adapt to the way that internet had driven music consumption. So it had gone from a model where everyone was watching pop songs and more or less audiences were moving along to the same kinds of pop artists, to a point where the internet came along, blew it all apart. Everyone developed an enormously wide range of tastes. They got far more into many different niches, and no one person could be bound by one genre they like. And television was still there with like one channel, in this country, 5 channels, to try and talk to everyone. And it really struggled to sort of adapt to use the internet or to find artists that could still command big enough audiences to actually be on television. So we were sort of born as like the anti that. And at the time, the frustration we felt was that there was zero television or sort of visual support for the scenes we were excited about. So what we did is we switched on a kind of a video window, which however crap it looked, what it lacked in production quality and all the things that a music video gives you, it made up for in this like absolute realness. And that was the thing we were trying to transport. And those shows we did, I mean, any of the keener eyed of you would have seen people like James Blake and Subtract and Theo Parrish and Jamie XX and Mount Kimby and Hudson Mohawk and all kinds of people in the background there. We basically had this Tuesday night session as a way of anyone who we thought was exciting or a friend had recommended would come and pass through, DJ, perform, do what they wanted, and anyone who cared online watched. People all around the world started to lock in. We had no website, no agenda at all. We'd live stream for 4 hours. Sometimes there were power cuts, whatever. And then 2 days later, when we got round to it, we would upload the recordings to YouTube. And over 12 months, it built a phenomenal following. People were sort of using it as a way of feeling excited about what was happening in East London, getting into the music that was coming out of London by seeing, watching kids react to a music that was coming out of clubs in London really helped them get into that experience way before it was like hitting Brazil or hitting Barcelona or wherever. And I'll almost move on in a second, but the biggest sort of next phase for us was about 6 months into what you saw there. We then said, this is more than a kind of hobby. It's super exciting. We're getting hundreds of thousands of people watching this every week through the VOD and live. Let's try this out somewhere other than London. What if what's happening in London is just scratching the surface? What if this movement that we've kind of televised and built an audience around is the same in every city around the world, more or less? So we went to Berlin, which is obviously an obvious nearby EasyJet flight we could take. We took our one webcam, a laptop, set up a show. We said to a local guy we trusted there who is now in charge of all our shows there, we said to him, do the same thing. Go straight to the stuff that television doesn't touch and can't touch, and put it on screens via a webcam. So book what's cool in Berlin and see if anyone cares. We did a techno show from the basement of an old warehouse with a swimming pool in it. It was an actual old boiler room. And we had a phenomenal reaction. Even more people all around the world locked in who'd heard about Berghain and Berlin's dance culture, and suddenly they could see it and feel it. They found it entertaining, exciting to watch, and we had this enormous kind of level of encouragement. And we also met fans who'd been watching Boiler Room for 6 months, and they were just like, it feels exciting, I can relate to the scene, et cetera, et cetera. So basically over that year, we sort of ran as fast as we could at trying out the idea of opening up windows into different exciting music scenes, being completely direct and authentic in our coverage. And ultimately, we created a medium that television could not create. We put dance music onto screens. We did long-form, sprawling, 4-hour broadcasts that television could never do. We could hear about something that was exciting and be there the next day. If there was swearing or weed or booze or police coming in, it didn't really matter, although we generally tried to finish things at 11 p.m. and keep them quite sober. But we were able to do all these things that helped define our brand. And actually, I've got another video which we should just play like 20 seconds of, or 30 seconds of. But what you just saw was the sort of first version of it. The thing that really blew us up was when we started to cover dance culture, when we started to really get into like what dance music looked like today. And so video number 2 kind of epitomizes what we did 6 months into that year when we went to Berlin. And this is what went viral everywhere. and more of that. But basically, it was like we went from an empty room of 15 people to trying to catch energy of a few hundred people. And to sort of cut the waffle, since that moment, in 2011, we set up a business, created a website, a logo, figured out how the hell we were going to generate revenue, called it Boiler Room because that was what the name of the room was, and we'd always just use the sign that was ripped off the door. It was a sort of very natural process. And this was 2011, and since then we have 32 million people, video plays a month, 21 million uniques a month. We have 145 full-time staff. We have commercial partners, and we generate a significant amount of brand partnership revenue to support the whole business. And we've raised investment from some of the biggest partners, people like WPP and first investors in Citymapper and SoundCloud, Neil Reimer at Index. We're not rich by any means, and we're still growing very fast, but we've built a stable commercial operation that allows us to grow. And most important, we've built an audience who loves the slightly weird type of content we make that, as I said, is not necessarily always the most pretty, but is very real time, is very reactive to things happening right now. It doesn't take 3 months to make it, and allows us to be a real currency in covering music as it happens from all around the world, not just London or Berlin.
Super authentic. So, speaking of revenue, you tend to focus on emerging artists rather than established artists who might bring in more press and sponsors for you. Why is that?
I think from the beginning, the way we've designed Boiler Room as it started is making something that made sense for us. Selfishly, for the first year, it was a thing we did for fun. So you think about what do you want to do, and then people started to react to it. And actually, the best thing that happened over that 12 months in terms of when we set up a business was from 2010 to 2011. By the end of that year, we'd gotten something like 18 million uniques watching this content that more or less anyone would have said was niche or underground. And we were getting many hundreds of thousands of plays, sometimes more than that every week. But ultimately, when we had over sort of 15 million people watching ridiculously up and coming to the point where they hadn't even done a tour yet, or a gig abroad, it gave us confidence that we were in a new era for music where the concept of the mainstream and pop artists was outdated, in that there is an enormous audience that consumes the kind of music we like, the stuff that you would consider up and coming. There's a much bigger pool of up and coming talent, all who have careers without getting to pop. And there's an enormous audience for all of that, but it's the sort of sum of the parts. So it's an audience that you gather through 50 artists and the audiences they represent, rather than 3 pop artists and then pulling in everything. So to answer your question, we focus on up-and-coming talent because it's the most interesting. Instinctively, it's the stuff that's never been on television. It's always been too niche for television. It's the stuff that's completely within our natural passion. It is also, for us, the true route to scale. We've got 32 million video plays, 20 million plus users, without ever featuring a pop star, without ever breaking our music policy. So for us, it's the way we're growing. It's the market that is not accounted for. And pop, as its old concept, is a dying concept.
No Britney Spears on Boiler Room.
No Britney Spears.
Okay.
Rihanna would be great.
So, yeah. So you have a new TV app in beta. You're aiming to create music TV for the internet age, digital age, internet age. Tell us why you're doing that and why now.
So we've been running for 6 years as a business now. And I guess throughout it, we've been very we've cared as much about music and the world we're in as we do about realizing that true potential in video. And people have made references to sort of, in absence of an MTV, Boiler Room being this kind of internet-born answer to it. But deep down, I think, we haven't felt ready to take a big step towards that. We got to a point at the end of last year where we looked at our ability to almost get in the room with anyone we want to, with the way that our coverage had sort of expanded from a couple of big capital cities to now we do 30 broadcasts and events in cities all around the world, really spread everywhere. And we cover music that ranges in sort of diversity from dance music to grime to trap in Asia to funk in Brazil, house and Afro beats in Africa, music from all around the world. And we started to look, there's actually a video I can show you, but we started to look at the kind of range of what we were doing, our ability to sort of actually be more ambitious in how people watch us. And we got really excited about the concept that, when you look around at music television or watching music today, in the MTV era, there was something like 80 million was the total addressable audience size of MTV, the biggest, most influential music broadcast network. MTV falls, the internet comes along, there's now well over 1 billion people watching music on YouTube. Watching music has gotten bigger than ever, but there is absolutely no home for it. There's no home for music television, there's no home for any kind of quality music viewing. There's an enormous amount of powerful, disparate channels that focus just on UK grime, just on US hip hop, just on French rap, just on cloud rap coming from Russia. There's these absolutely amazing voices and people out there, but there's no one place you can go and enjoy it. And when we looked at our content, our ambition, and thought, like, what's our evolution? How can we really make the Boiler Room experience have a sort of second, much more engaging position? We started to look at smart TV. We had no interest in traditional linear TV for the reasons I said. It cannot support a range of choice in music, and it just doesn't make sense. Smart TV is an interesting one. If we looked at what we were using, again, building it for ourselves, we were like Chromecast, Roku, Google Android, PlayStation. We're watching TV through those platforms, or plugging an HDMI into a laptop and putting it into a big screen. So we started to get really excited about, like, our content finessed to be on big screen could be a really exciting prospect. There's also something interesting in the dynamic between Boiler Room's a non-competitive brand to almost anyone out there, if not anyone out there. We really did run with a new medium we created, with sort of long-form, cheap performance content, rapidly produced. Meanwhile, most people on the internet that are influential in music, it is still fairly traditional television-style content, short-form documentaries, short-form clips put on the internet. And I think one of the exciting things about not being competitive for everyone, having good relationships to a lot of those powerful niche broadcasters, it allows us to not only create a TV destination for our content, but also to reach out to archival content out there right now that doesn't have a home, new music film that's being made that has absolutely no destination to be premiered and platformed. And also look at the YouTube channels and those powerful internet-born video broadcasters out there who could be making the most incredible documentary about the rise of road rap in the UK, or whatever, and Afrobeats in Nigeria. And if we empowered them and gave them facility to make those films, that would be a great relationship, be like our production company relationship, and we could get that on TV. So I don't know, for a multitude of reasons, mainly to do with wanting to create an ultimate destination for music video, and being at the right point to take that step, we decided to work on it. I guess another way of qualifying it is quite simply when we were looking at all the different stuff we do, it had come a long way from DJ sets in London and Berlin. And the third clip, which we should play for a bit, or the whole thing even, is quite a nice view on, like, proving almost that music today is more exciting than it ever has been before. So it's not just that we're televising a bunch of artists that have never been on TV before, it's that there is just simply far more music being made in every country around the world, and far more audience for those specific tastes. And that probably is the biggest reason of all to rethink music TV for the internet age, and to think about how we can get that level of information, those exciting things on television, and build on that. So if we play the third clip, this is a kind of clip of what almost a month of Boiler Room looks like, with this sort of global spread.
Donate, yo. And again, donate, yo. Donate, yo. Understand? Kablimpsy, the nail.
Bumbo clap.
Get high, big to the bed. My style is big to the bed. And again, big to the bed. My style is big to the bed. And again, big to the bed. My style is big to the bed. And again, big to the bed. My style is big to the bed. D-O, D-O, D-D-D-O, D-O, D-O, N-A-D-O, D-O, D-O, D-D-D-O, D-O, D-O, N-A-D-O, D-O. I had a recent check Been told I'm a seasoned vet, and I get a decent check. When I'm up the motorway road, I more than know that my beats are hench. Couple on and wench. Hit the bass and kick with strength, so the bass and kicks intent. The man them on side, on stage, we on vibe. I won't lie, come links, come lamps. A big night out with the lads. I see two girls to the back. VIP, I told the man them let's go. I'm like a stage show. On the mic I give the stone cold. Big to the bed. My style is big to the bed. And again, big to the bed. My style is big to the bed. And again, big to the bed. My style is big to the bed. And again, big to the bed. My style is big to the bed. D-O, D-O, D-D-D-O, D-O, D-O, N-A, D-O, 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 D-D-D-O, D-O, D-O, N-A-E-O.
I mean, probably the simplest answer to your question is when we were looking at all of our content at the end of last year, we looked at that and we were like, Jesus Christ, this needs to be on big screens. And it just provoked all these ideas as to like how we could evolve beyond how we started. And it seemed like a really nice, natural progression.
Nice. Thank you. So a big part of your business is driven by brand partnerships. How do you make sure that you stay true to boiler room culture without letting those big brands kind of take over?
Work really hard at it. I mean, I think we've not always got it right at all. Definitely not. We've got it right sometimes really well. I think it's a really difficult thing, you know, like I think long term, the solution is two things. One, next year we are going to bring out a new approach to media, marketing, reaching young people for your brand that's going to be quite pioneering and fairly radical against the way the general media industry works. We're going to redefine a language that is sort of defined by young people and a metric that is more meaningful to young people than reach, or like even the engagement metrics that the whole media industry regurgitates around. Mm-hmm. So I think one is like, I find the media industry as it is currently has a lot of massive problems with it in terms of like the amount of branded content campaigns that come out that no young people even see, let alone care about. Yet you see these reports flying around with tons of big numbers saying, wasn't it a huge success? And I think broadly speaking, we think there's a very clever and much needed way of bringing brands much closer to audiences. And I mean that in every sense of the way, and defining the campaigns they run through to how they actually distribute those campaigns. I think this concept of do an activation in London, run some branded media online, and you're going to hit the whole country is total nonsense.
Stick their logo on a boiler room video.
Completely. I mean, like, I think one of the ways we built our brand most effectively was constantly touching down in different cities and always giving people the feeling that Boiler Room is actually there and reachable and cut through to them in their real life. Even if they saw a friend on it at a Boiler Room event on social media, or they almost could have gone to one, or they did go to one, or they just watched the content and it felt accessible and real and like someone next door to them. So I think one part of how we're going to work to sort of better the working with brands and media and joining of culture and big brand sponsor is to create metrics and a way of working whereby the things that brands come up with and inherently we and other people will work to deliver to young people are better thought out in the first place and then better delivered and so more meaningful and actually, yeah.
So do you turn down a lot of the brands who approach you? You see them as a bad fit? Or is there anyone that you wouldn't work with?
There's definitely people we wouldn't work with. I mean, the second point of what I was going to say is, sorry, that it does play into your question as well. The second point is that I think there is a problem with being an eternally ad-funded, free business. Mm-hmm. I mean, like, there are so many big examples of this at the moment with big evaluations and so on, but I think there's an inherent problem with always relying on advertising in whatever form it comes as your sole means of driving revenue to your business. I think it means that you pursue this sort of endless growth and reach that satisfies your next round of investors, and it sort of gives you more growth numbers for which to monetize. But I think by doing that, you really alienate your core audience base, because you're not thinking about how can I get that super fan of ours to care so much about us that they're checking us every day, that they love us like an adult loves New Yorker or Vanity Fair or whatever it is. Like, there's this level of dedication that I think gets left behind when you just are always pursuing reach for the sake of reach. I also think that plays into how how, and I mean, like, to give an example, I think that we need to be focused on growth always, but within the sort of framework of being able to sell something of value to our consumers. So developing a subscription package or a membership plan with Boiler Room is at the heart of our thinking.
Okay.
Because I think it means we will stay dedicated to doing focus groups and maintaining this direct contact with our core audience base in order to work out how we develop a subscription product. And that's great because it drives you more revenue without leaning too heavily on advertising, and so it means you don't have to rely on advertising. It also means your audience is super engaged. And to your question, that puts you in a situation where you can say no to advertisers, because whoever's sitting here, anyone who tells you that they are really strict on who they take money off or they don't, it's bollocks. They're like, most people starting a business really need money and will figure out a way of making it acceptable to do it. We've got to a point where we can be a bit more selective, but for sure in 6 years there's been some hiccups.
Yeah. So my next question was going to be, what other ways are you looking at monetizing Boiler Room in addition to the brand partnerships? So you're working on a subscription model. Is there anything else?
No, broadly speaking, there's a subscription model. I can't really talk too much about it yet, but it relates to access to events in cities near you.
Ah, exciting.
And ties in with our digital products, the TV apps and so on. Mm-hmm. And then advertising and brand partnerships remain a very real and valuable thing for us and for brands. We can get a brand in front of young people to a really effective way, but we also are refining how we do that.
Yeah.
But no, for now, I think those are the main two paths. And I think within our plan to kind of bring a lot of different music video content together, we will be able to relicense, repackage, and sell content to TV and so on if we want, but I'm not too focused on that.
So you've been partnering with Google on a VR series using their Daydream VR, is it a headset?
Yeah, it's a VR headset.
Yeah. So can you tell us a bit more about that?
It's amazing. We created a, we've been like talking for everyone when VR started being like the hot topic, 360, whatever. A lot of people obviously calling up Boiler and being like, 99% of your audience have never been to a Boiler Room. They all want to go to a Boiler Room. Wouldn't virtual reality be the ultimate solution? And we tried out a bunch of stuff. We got to a point with Google. It was really exciting. We said, don't try and like imitate real life, because it doesn't work at all in VR. It sort of comes across weird. But if you're a bit more theatrical and you shoot it like a music video, it can be kind of interesting and it can be a real experience. So we created our first attempt at that, which was to sort of bring people a classic Berlin nightlife experience, meaning like kids having orgies in the corner, crazy dark rooms with guys in latex, whatever, all that stuff. So that's all kind of in there within the censorship constraints of Google.
So you can do that without getting your fingers dirty.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can probably do it in the most boring way, but it's pretty amazing. And you know, we did it and we launched it in a club in Berlin and had people kind of wandering around with their hands out, and it was really cool. I'm interested in the whole thing. I don't know, like 360, that was an amazing project. I think the two things that frustrate me, firstly, is like everyone, it's too expensive to create, and it's inhibitive to actually really doing anything interesting, unless you've got 3 million to experiment with to make it like half an hour of content across 3 pieces. And
is there any other emerging tech that you're integrating into Boiler Room?
Second thing about VR, it's like, you probably love VR, so I'm not allowed to say bad things. But I think there needs to be more VR street teaming, because what was best about that project, which I loved the most, was that we did an event where 300 people actually got to use it. Obviously, a lot of people are doing that, but I think a lot of people have made really good VR campaigns, but a lot of people haven't seen them. And I think there should be more people walking around at festivals, on the street, just everywhere, trying to actually get people to experience this stuff. But yes, onto technology. No, not really. I mean, you know, I'm fascinated by smart TV. I think there's a huge opportunity I think it's at a very early point, smart TV. If anyone's used it, you can sort of see it by the infancy of the apps that are on there. But I think that it's the absolute destination for millennials gravitating back towards big screens. And so I'm fascinated by what we can do by being an early adopter of it within the sort of next 18 months before it goes crazy. Other technology, I don't know. I can't really, there's nothing.
Okay.
Oh, 0 minutes. Sorry.
Okay then, final question. So you've created this really innovative platform and you've built it by continuing to innovate. How do you keep that momentum going? There are a lot of people who I'm sure if you have any tips, it would be interesting for you to share?
You know what? One of the most, like, I myself am constantly wide-eyed and looking at everything and flip-flopping too much, but always having, like, it's naturally inbuilt for me. But actually, one of the things I found has been most exciting about expanding is, it's just a boring answer, but bringing in great people who lead your teams and forcing myself out of the way I work, which is quite impulsive. And if I think something's a good idea, within a minute I'll be trying to do it, and that can often end in disaster. Sometimes it works out well. There's a really interesting dynamic when you grow and you're forced to kind of almost productize your company a bit, be a bit more analytical about things, do research. So take an idea, develop it with 6 people in the room who are all incredibly clever and who are far more capable than yourself, and then go through the kind of processes of like comparing it against other benchmark market data, analyzing the thing by speaking to your fans. I think there's something very interesting about, like, for me, it's like I'm only just getting into it, but like almost Dummy's Guide to Growing a Business, you do get into all this stuff of like people forcing you to be a bit more accurate about your impulses. And I think a lot of stuff comes out of the process of talking to your audience, not thinking that your initial idea makes sense. So I don't know, for me, the recent thing has been like a more grown-up approach to the business, and sitting and meeting users and doing all that stuff is kind of cool. You actually end up finding someone had a far more accurate way of doing things than you did.
Okay. All right, then. Anything else to add before we wrap up on Bound London?
Our TV app comes out next month. You should try it out. And then we roll out across most platforms between now and the end of the year. But yeah, try it out.